Hi, my name is Yachen Wang, but you can also call me Mason. I'm a graduate student from Northeastern University's Oakland campus, and this is my web development midterm evaluation presentation. If you're interested in this course or the project we've done so far, you can click this link below to find it from the website of our professor. So here's an overview of today's presentation. First, in the first part, we're gonna talk about the global picture of all the topics, basically a concept map of what is going on in the web architecture. The second part is a general explanation of the breadth of concepts. I'm gonna basically list out all the concepts we've touched upon and give you a brief explanation on them. And then we're gonna do a deep dive on specifically JavaScript. And eventually there's gonna be a short live coding example. So with all those being said, let's move on to the first part. So before diving deeper into any of the technology, let's first take a look at the whole picture of web architecture based on what we have learned in this course so far. So as you can see here, this is a diagram I've made with Figma, which I think explain the concept of web architecture pretty well. I also use an analogy of running a restaurant, which I think is really self-explanatory. And as you can see here, basically web architectures consist of three different parts. So first is front end client, which is basically the table you will be sitting at the restaurant. So as a client, as a person who goes to a restaurant, this is where all you will be interacting with, like throughout the experience, basically. And then like we have the backend, which is the kitchen, where your order will be made and processed, basically behind the scenes. And then eventually is the database, where all the data of the application will be stored. So basically is where all the ingredients for your food will be stored at in the kitchen. With those being said, let's first take a deeper look at what the front end is doing. So it usually consists of three different type of files. The first is HTML files, which will define the meaning and structure of web content. Like for example, like if you want to define, the things you want to order, like I want a large soda, I want a side of fries, and I want a steak as the main course. So basically, that's what HTML is doing. And then we move on to the CSS, which would describe a web page's appearance and presentation. So taking the restaurant example, like if you want your drink to be presented in a pink glass, or if you want your steak to be presented on a cheese board instead of a plate for some reason, this is where you make that change happen. And after all of that, you have the script, which will describe a web page's functionality and behavior. You can think of it basically as the waiter at your table. It will record your order and send it to the backend as a request. With that being said, in the backend, the server will first receive the request, and it is the core of the backend that handles all the requests. You can think of it basically as the main chef at the kitchen. It will then send it to middleware, which are made of functions that process requests before they reach their final route handler. So, for example, like when you're using an app, sometimes it will ask you for your login infos, credentials like username and password. So basically, this is a chef who will make sure, this order is from the correct table, and this is actually what the customer wants. After all of that was made sure, then it will go to the router where basically you can think of it as a specialized chef. Since your order, for example, involves a steak, it will be routed to a router which will specifically handle this steak, anything related to steak, basically. So yeah, after that the most logical thing is to check the first check, whether all the ingredients are available, right? You don't want your customer to have to make the order and then realize, I don't have the stuff to make it. So that's when you go to the database where all the application data is stored. So if there indeed is are all those ingredients you want, you can then get the ingredients from the database, and the router will basically cook the steak for you. And after it's being cooked, it will send back to the server, and the server will send the order, the finished order as a response to the front end, which will usually received by the script, and the script will handle it and make it, exactly the way you want, and then present it to you as the customer. And yeah, that's basically everything about web architecture, based on the materials we have covered so far. And yeah, let's move on to the next part. So with the first part being covered, let's now move on to the second part of this presentation, which is a brief description of all the concepts we have covered in this class. First of all, let's talk about HTML, which is Hypertext Markup Language. As I've mentioned in my first part, it's actually the backbone of a web page. It will help us define the structure and layout accordingly. Why is it important? Because it can provide content and elements like paragraph, images, and buttons. Basically, based on an analogy to a restaurant, like for example, if I want to order a steak or I want to order a fish or something like that, I can just put in like a opening tag and closing tag. Like for example, here I want a paragraph, so I can put them like this, and then I just put the content in between. And with all these three different parts, now you have an element that you can put on a web page. For example, here, this is the index.html page from my second project. And as you can see here, when I want to add a heading to the body, basically what the visible part of the web page, I would just put in H1 tag and put the actual title in between them. If I want to add a paragraph, I can just do it like this. And if I want to add a new image, I can do it like that by using the root to the actual image in my root folder. And how to use them with CSS and JavaScript at the same time? Well, basically you can use an external style sheet like that. Basically, you put the CSS file as a link inside of the head section, and or you can also use some inline styles. Like for example, like here, if you want to create some styles for this div, you can just add a style attribute and then put all the CSS inside of the double quotation. Same logic applied to the JavaScript file. You can just add it by using the script tag and add the actual route to the JavaScript file. Then let's talk about CSS, which is cascading style sheets. So as I've also mentioned in the first part, it can help us define the visual appearance of our web pages. It can help us control layout, colors, fonts, responsiveness, and basically everything that is related to aesthetics. Like the example I've talked about in the first part, like if you want to order your steak on a cheese board instead of a plate, this is where you make the difference. So some important concepts regarding to those are CSS selectors and pseudo class. This is a code snippet from my external CSS file for my index page, I believe. And here I'm using element selector as demonstrated here. Basically, I put in the element name of footer and then put all the styling attributes afterwards. So every footer element on this specific page will be styled accordingly. Also, I also use the class selector right here. So right now, like if you have an element that is in the network class, it will be styled in this with this actually. And also for pseudo class, I've added this hover on the nav link. So originally the nav link will be presented in this color, but whenever now I put my mouse over the actual link, it will turns into a brighter pink, basically. There are a lot of things we can dive deeper into CSS, like how we can change different fonts, different font size, or the width, height of basically your inline block or your flex block. So yeah, it's a lot of concepts. Since due to the time constraint, I won't be talking too much about them though. Next, let's talk about JavaScript, but specifically with ES6 modules. Same as before, due to the time constraint, I'm probably going to do a deep dive in the third part. So right here, I'll just keep it short. So all we have to know is that it is a programming language that can make web pages dynamic and interactive. For example, the snippet I'm showing here is from my index page script from my second project. So as you can see, I've added a bunch of different functions to handle different stuffs. Like for example, here, if a user want to create a new entry submission, it will actually grab the value from what the user has put in and convert it into the desired format and try to use a post request to the server to actually update it in the database, and also the backend. And what is a ES6 module, you may ask? Well, actually, it's a way to organize JavaScript code into reusable pieces. Why is it important? Because it can help us improve the maintainability and reusability of our code a lot. Basically, all you have to do is open your package.json file after you've installed your Node package manager, and you can add this line at the top, which is type module after the main line. And afterwards, you can use basically ES6 modules export and import as demonstrated by these two screenshots. Right here, I'm exporting the router from my interest.js JS file, which is the script for that page. And here is how I import it in the server.js file. So yeah, basically just following that format and it should be fine. And also it's important to remember that actually here, if I set the thing I want to export as default, you can name it whatever in the file where you actually import it. But if you actually want to export like a specific thing that is not like a default, you have to put like a curly bracket around it to make it work. Next, let's talk about Node.js, which is basically the intro to our backend. So what is Node.js? Well, it's actually a runtime environment that would allow JavaScript to run on a server. It can enable JavaScript to handle backend logic like processing requests and managing data. As you can see from this code snippet below, which is from Node.js official website, this is how you can create like a little simple server with Node.js. So basically, you just import the create server function from uh, this package, and then you make this callback function where the server, if receive a request, will return file with status code 200 and the content type in text, and then it will actually print the line "Hello World" to you. And this is also a callback function that enables your server to be listening on the port you desire and also the IP address you want. However, nowadays, people actually rarely use Node.js by itself. They usually choose to use Express.js as a framework to make it a lot easier to achieve, to basically set up a server. So yeah, Express.js is a lightweight web framework for Node.js that simplifies server-side development. It can help handle HTTP requests and build APIs very efficiently. For example, as you can see from this code snippet down here, this is from Express official website. And first of all, you basically just import Express from the framework from the actual package, and then you create an instance of Express. You define the desired port you want the server to be listening on, and then here it's basically whenever the your server gets a GET request, it can send out hello world as a response. And also here you enable it to be listening on the port you want. So yeah, as you can see, it's overall it's much easier to write and cleaner comparing to Node.js, and that's why a lot of people prefer it over using just Node.js itself. With all these being said, let's now talk about what actually is a server. But I think based on the examples we've discussed, you probably kind of have an idea of what it is. While it is a system that listens for requests from the front end and responds with data, basically. It can process and deliver web content. And yeah, basically just like what I've mentioned in the first part, this is like the kitchen of your application where everything behind the scenes all the logics is being handled. And yeah, right here it's a code snippet from my actual server file for my second project. And you can definitely see a lot of similar things to those examples, like how I import express, how I define the port, how I create the instance, and yeah, how I uh, also add this one to listen, let the server listen for the request coming in. And with that being said, let's talk about what is a middleware. Well, they're actually functions that run between receiving a request and sending a response. They are very widely used for things like authentications, logging, and error handling. So basically, in my example, like these three lines are the middleware of this server. The express.json one will help parses incoming JSON request bodies. The URL encoded one will help parses URL encoded data from the HTML forms, and the cookie parser will allow Express to read and parse cookies from HTTP requests. So yeah, basically, what they're doing here is after the server send out the response, I can actually parse them in the way I want. So my backend, well, my routers will actually understand what the content is and act accordingly. And with that being said, let's now move on to the topics of what is a router. And as you can probably remember from the last slide, uh, right here. After I create a server file, I've also added these two API endpoints, one for my entries, one for my quotes. And then whenever basically a request that ends with this in the URL, it will basically set off the router for me. So the associated data will be handled correctly. Well, it's yeah, as I said before, it can ensure requests to be directed to the correct backend logic, like what is going on here. So basically, if the entry router acknowledges that the user has sent out a put request regarding this entry with a specific ID, it then will actually update that specific entry in the database, at least attempt to. And if there's an error, it will be cached. Same logic goes here. If a delete request is received with an ID of the entry, this function will help us handle that and actually attempt to delete the associated entry in the database. And mentioning of database, well, database is actually basically a system that stores, retrieves, and manages data. And you can think of it, as I've mentioned, the first part as the storage department of your kitchen, where all the ingredients of your meals are coming from. So it ensures persistence of user information, content, and transactions. And basically what I'm doing here in this code snippet, this is from my DB file, I believe, and it's basically connect to my MongoDB database. And with that being said, well, what is MongoDB? It's actually the database we are asked to use for this course specifically, and it is a NoSQL database that stores data in JSON-like format. Why it's important? Because it can help us handle large-scale applications with flexible and document-based storage. So what is going on here is basically I'm using the MongoDB LS, which is one of the way you can actually use MongoDB. And for my project, I've created a database specifically named Pride Journal. And within it, I've added two collections since I'm dealing with two different type of data, right? Like one is for my entries, one is for all the clothes I want to display on the main page. So as you can see here in the quote section, I've added uh, these basically quotes entry, and within each of them there will be an ID property that is basically automatically assigned by MongoDB, and I will use it to actually locate the entry I want and actually make variations to it. And then I also have two properties that I made myself. One is author, which well basically saves like the author of this specific quote, and then the content, which is the quote itself. And in this way, basically, all my datas are formatted in the same way, which will very easily enable me to do CRUD operations on them, basically. And yeah, that's everything about part two. And yeah, let's move on to the next part. Moving forward, welcome to part three, which is a deep dive in JavaScript, because I think that's the topic that I'm most interested in. And so, what is JavaScript? As we've mentioned in part two, it is a high-level interpreted programming language used to create dynamic web applications. It enables dynamic content updates, real-time interactions, and event handlings. Some of its advantages are it's lightweight and fast because it runs directly in your browser. It's also very versatile. It can be used for both front end and back end development. And that's possibly the reason why it's one of the most important skill to learn as a web developer nowadays. And also it works with a DOM, which allow direct manipulation of web page. And we're gonna discuss that later in this presentation too. And it also has an event-driven model, which listens for user actions, making basically interactivity really easy. And last but not least, it also supports asynchronous programming, which uses promises and async await. And we're going to talk about that later too. So why does it matter so much? Well, first, it is the foundation of modern web development because it basically enables people to use HTML and CSS simultaneously with it to build modern web applications and enable dynamic UI updates without refreshing the page. It's one of the most popular programming language, as I mentioned before, because it's been constantly ranked as number one in developer service. It is also used by a lot of top companies like Google, Facebook, and Netflix. And as you can see from this screenshot on the right, it's according to one survey done by Stack Overflow, it is way much more popular comparing to all its competitors in a programming language popularity survey, basically. And it also has a very versatile usage. It can be used for both front end and back end, as mentioned before, with frameworks such as React, Vue, Angular, and for back end, it's Node.js and Express.js. And it even supports some mobile app development too, if you're using React Native or Native or Ionic. So, due to the time constraint of this presentation, I'm not going to get too into the basic functions of JavaScript, things like how to basically set up a variables, how to convert variable types, stuff like that. You can check it at the end document. And if you have any question with the following parts. And with that being said, let's start this section. So what makes JavaScript functions powerful? Well, because functions in JavaScript are basically first-class citizens. First of all, they can be assigned to variables, like what is going on here. Like if you write it as that, basically you assign this function to a variable, like not only naming it, but also assign to a variable. So in later of your code, you can use this variable to basically use this function. And following the same logic, here's an example of a higher order function where functions can be passed as arguments to other functions or like parameters. Like right here, you can see, except from the variables x and y, we also pass in this callback function as a parameter, basically. And it can be used actually inside of this function. And also, it's important to mention that ES6 has this new feature, which is arrow function. It allows you to basically write a JavaScript function super easy and concise. Like what's going on here? You basically first assign a name to this function, and then you use a format like this. So these are your parameters, and this is the actual like all the content inside the actual function. So yeah, when this function is being called as a variable with the correct with the appropriate parameters, it will print out the result based on the content. And some of other built-in functional methods I think it's also worth mentioning. First is map. It's a method that can help you create a new array by applying an array to each element of an existing array. However, it's also good to notice that it does not modify the original array. So like what is going on here, you have an array of numbers 1 to 5. And if you create this function called double and using the map method, you can actually uh, change basically every element within this numbers array and multiply them each of them by 2. So that's why when you actually console.log the double array result, you can see every number has been doubled by multiplied by 2. And also, the dot future method is also very helpful. It can help you create an array with only the elements that pass a given condition. Like, for example, here we have a user array of 3 different user objects. They each have their own name and age. And if we use the dot future and filter out all the users with an age that is greater or equal to 21, then you should see, like, eventually you should see the adults array becoming like having 2 objects of Alice and Bob because their ages are fits the criteria. And next, let's also talk about reduce method, which can accumulate values from an array into a single result. Kind of like what's the double quote dot join function in Python. So here we have an array of words. JavaScript is fun. So using the dot reduce, we can actually join them into a single string. So how is JavaScript applying in the front end? You might ask at this point. Well, it's basically being used with DOM manipulation, which will help you dynamically update a web page without reloading. Like for example, what's happening here? Basically, you use get element by ID to select one of your button, which has the ID button, and you add an event listener to it, which will listen for the action for the event click. So when the user actually click it, it will listen to it, and then set up of this function right here, which will get another element by its ID and changes inner HTML text to button click. Yeah, it's this is a like a very simple example, and actually in a real world development circumstance, it's usually applied with a lot of different frameworks like React, Vue, and Angular, like what we've mentioned. So at this stage, you probably like confused what was the DOM I was talking about, the document object model. Well, here is a good explanation. Well, it represents an HTML document as a tree structure. So if you've taken data structure before, you must be, this picture might look pretty familiar to you because basically, like this is our usual HTML file, right? And you can see like it's basically exactly like a tree. So you got your head, you got your body, like these 2 different parts, and then you have all the subsidiaries elements uh, under it in a tree as well. Yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory. So the JavaScript basically interact with this DOM tree to read, update, and modify web pages dynamically. And you can like select an element with a query selector, like right here. It is selecting an element with the H1 tag. And also, it can help us change different content too. Like, for example, it's changing an element with the ID demo and changes inner HTML text to updated text. And you can also do something like modifying element style in CSS You can use a priority selector to select it and change the style color to blue, like what's shown here. Also, like this example, we've discussed about it before. It can also help you to handle different events with event listeners. So moving forward, to actually understand how to use JavaScript to create a backend for an application, I think it's very essential to understand what is asynchronous code. So why do we use asynchronous code in JavaScript? Well, because JavaScript is single-threaded. What that means is basically like in other programming languages such as Python, like a line will only be executed after the last line has been executed correctly, right? But in JavaScript, it's a different story. A good way to I think to understand this is for me personally, I would like to think JavaScript as a train that won't wait at you at the station if you don't do something about it. So like for example, as you can see from the code snippet here, we have if we actually run this, the output will actually the things the first one and the third segments will actually be the first one to appear because we have put a set timeout on the second line, which will delay it by 2 seconds. So as you can see, JavaScript won't wait for this line to finish. It will just continue. And so therefore, people think of a lot of ways to deal with it. The first one is called a callback, which is the oldest method. It's basically you put in the function you want to execute inside of the function as a parameter, and inside of it, you call it. But well, the downside is pretty obvious because it can lead to something called a callback hell, something like this, because you're having too many nested callbacks. Your code becomes unmanageable, and it's gonna be super hard to figure out what is going on. And that's why people come up with a different solution by using promise and then. So basically, as you can see here, we set up this function as a new promise, and then we use then after we try to execute the function. So actually, what is happening like in this then is going to be after the promise is delivered, basically. And as you can see, it's definitely solved the callback hell issue and makes the code a lot more cleaner. And then like we come to the async await approach, which is the newest, the most modern, the cleanest approach. Uh, so basically you just add, if you want to use async await on one function, you just put async before the function and also put await before the function you think that will probably lead to some delays. And voila, the console.log line will actually wait for this line to finish. And yeah, eventually it can even make the code even cleaner. So now let's talk about the backend JavaScript application. To use JavaScript beyond the browser with Node.js, it can actually power server-side applications. It has many different key features from Node.js and also a lot of frameworks available like Express, Nest, and Fastify. Also for the database integration, you have different options like MongoDB, what we have discussed in part two. Also, Postgre SQL, SQL or MySQL or Firebase, something like that. So yeah, that's basically everything about the deep dive part of JavaScript. And now we're gonna do a live code demo of where I'm going to show you how to make a simple front end, back end application using JavaScript. All right, now let's try to put what we have learned today in practice. Well, right here, I'm going to do a live coding demonstration, and I'm going to basically do a demo front end and back end development using JavaScript. So first thing first, let's open a terminal, and you can see from here, we're gonna first initialize a node package manager, like in basically any other object. Uh, that's yes for everything, and then the package.json has been created. Like I've mentioned, we gotta change the type to module. So we can use the ES6 module. After that is complete, let's install the dependencies we need today, which is Express and also Chorus, which we will use to handle requests from the front end. And oh yeah, I forgot, package manager, which is really important. Forward. Yep, well, it's being set up. Oh, it's already set up. Great. Now we can create a file for the actual server. So what we're gonna do right now, well, the first thing we're gonna do is import, right? We're gonna import Express and cores and we're gonna use them. So let's do it now. Uh, import cores, right? File. And now, like what I've discussed in my examples, we need to create an instance for the Express framework. Accounts and add it for us, and we're gonna let it use the cores so we can handle the request from front end. All right, after that complete, what we need right now is we need to build a simple API endpoint. So our data basically can be fetched in the correct API endpoint. So yeah, let's do it. Docket. First, we need to define a route. So I guess API and message would be very appropriate. And then we'll use the arrow function, passing the request and response of the server as parameters. And then we can define the response we want to send back. So as I mentioned before, I want to send back a JSON object. So therefore, I'm gonna create one like this, message as property, and hello from the server string as its value. And yep, afterwards we need to set up listening on the server so it can be listening on the port we desire. Here's what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna basically define the port above so we can reuse it if we need it in future. And right here, you can put in basically port and also arrow function, which will console log a sentence running on port. Yeah, exactly. Now let's try if the server is established correctly. We can do that by using Node. So we just run it with Node, this JavaScript file. And let's see. Well, it's running great. So yeah, so it means everything is working correctly. We can then move on to the front end part. Uh, so I'm going to create a HTML page called index.html. I'm going to use a template, HTML5, and I'm going to have a title of live coding demo. Then in the body section, I'm going to first have a heading, which is also live coding demo. And we're gonna need a button, interact. So let's call this button a fetch button. And we can set its ID as fetch button. And we also need a paragraph to display the message we want to print out. That is, we just received from a server. So we're gonna need a paragraph, and we can set its ID as the response. That's a very appropriate name. And afterwards, we can actually write the script for it using JavaScript like that. And inside of the script, we can first we gotta use the get element by ID, as I've mentioned in the last part, to target the button. So whenever it is clicked, we're gonna design the reaction to it. And then what we need right here is we'll need a event listener, right? Because we'll need to listen for the event of a click and set off the rest. So at event listener, let's set the event as click, and then an arrow function of basically here, yep, and we can actually try to fetch the data from the from the backend. But I think we'll do a try and catch block first, because if there's going to be an error, I want to catch them, right? So basically console dot log error. Still error detected. And then let's actually print the error. All right. Great. Great. Uh, what's the issue here? Declaration was expected. Okay. Uh, yeah. Oh, since we're probably gonna use an async, because we're probably going to use the async awaits or to fetch the data. We also add this async at first, and then we can let's first find the response as a fetch statement from our desired API endpoint, which is HTTP / localhost, I guess. Oh yeah, API. Oh my God. No, I think it's message, right? What we define in the backend. And now let's actually convert it to JSON so I can use it. Response.json. Great. And then we can actually, after we get the data, we can display it on the web page where we're going to use the get element by ID again. Element by ID. And this is going to be the ID we're going to be using because this is the place where we want to put the statement. So we just write response and we change this inner text to the data message of the data object. Yep, perfect. Oh, what is this issue? Let me see. Oh, I think I forgot to close this. All right. Yep, everything looking fine. So now let's try to open the page on a live server and see if it's working. Let's open inspect just in case an error happened in the console. So yeah, it's working correctly, which meaning we have a running front end, back end using the JavaScript. Thanks for watching. Let's move on to the next part. So that's basically everything about this presentation. Hope you enjoyed it. And here I've included some of my personal info and also my GitHub account. So if you have any question or you want to shoot me a message, you can just find me on GitHub. Also, I've included a link to my class if you're interested in our projects, as I've mentioned at the beginning. And here are all the sources for the images presented in this presentation. Thanks for watching and please have a good day. Thank you.